The purpose of this documentary is to explain where democracy started and the birthplace of democracy in ancient Athens. How was the government in ancient Athens structured? The assembly was an important part of Athenian democracy. The assembly took place about 40 times a year, that is about every 8 to 10 days. The assembly met at the Punix. The Punix was a large open area at the top of a hill known as Punix Hill. The assembly would make decisions. They would discuss issues like religion, taxes, and the proper construction of ships. The assembly would discuss issues, make speeches, listen to speeches, and they would finally vote on the issues. People could also bring private issues to the assembly. Only male citizens could take part in the assembly. Even if you were a male but you weren't a citizen, you could not take part in the assembly. Women could not take part in the assembly. The Council of 500 was also an important part of ancient Athens. The Council of 500 was a full-time government of Athens. The council only had a term for 1 year, then a new council was selected. The citizens of Athens were divided into 10 tribes. 50 members from each tribe over the age of 30 served in the council. The group of 50 councillors from each tribe was in charge of the council for only 1/10 of the year. The Council of 500 was considered democratic because of these following ways. Council positions were chosen through a lottery to give everyone in tribes an equal chance to be picked for council. A citizen could only serve on council twice. Only allowing each citizen to serve twice gave more citizens a chance to be council members. The chairman or the leader of the council only had a position for 24 hours. That gave more than half of the council members a chance to be the leader during the year. The job of the council was to plan the agenda for the assembly meetings, and they supervised the running of the government. They would also discuss and vote on decrees that would then be presented for approval to the assembly. No laws could be made without approval of majority of the assembly. Another part of Athenian government was the Athenian courts. If Athenians had felt they had been wronged by someone, or if they had thought someone wasn't acting their best, they could bring their complaint to a magistrate. A magistrate was a government official who worked for the courts. The magistrates were chosen through a lottery for a 1-year term. Sometimes the magistrate would set a fine punishment, but sometimes they would send the case to trial. Any male citizen over the age of 30 could be chosen for the jury trial. It depended on how important the case was, but usually there was between 501 to 1,500 people on the jury. The jurors were chosen through a lottery on the day of the trial. Women could take part in cases before a magistrate, but a woman who was a defendant in a jury trial needed to have male citizens speak for her. Medics could be involved in cases, but they could not serve on the juries. In Athenian courts, people argued their case. The plaintiff and the defendant would have to be able to speak well enough to convince the jury of their position. Athenians that were wealthy sometimes hired professional speech writers to help them make more effective arguments. Once both sides of the case were heard, the jury would vote on whether the defendant was innocent or guilty. If the defendant was found guilty, the jury would then vote on a punishment. How did identity, status, and class structure impact citizenship in ancient Athens? The class structure of a person in ancient Athens made a big difference in what they were allowed to do. The citizens of ancient Athens were children of parents who were born in Athens. Only male citizens could take part in voting and governing the city. A young man became a citizen after he finished his military service at age 20. Women could not participate in Athenian democracy. Medics were people of Athens who were born outside the city-states. The medics were not allowed to own land, and they could not become citizens. Slaves were owned by either private Athenians or by the city-state. Many of the slaves were people who had been taken prisoner when their city-state was attacked by the Athenians. Slaves would not be able to become citizens. Women could not take part in the assembly. Every woman had a male guardian, either her father, brother, or husband, and was basically in charge of her life. Women rarely went outside of the house only for a family celebration or certain religious ceremonies. Even though a woman had the right to own clothing, jewelry, slaves, and land, she was not allowed to sell it. Male children spent their early years in the house with the women. At about age 7, the male children went to school to learn reading, writing, math, music, and literature. When a male child was born, the family would attach an olive branch to the front of the house. They did this as a sign of victory. When male children went to school, they did sports such as running, boxing, and wrestling. Playing those sports prepared them for the military service, which began at age 18. The lives of female children are much different than the lives of male children. When a female child was born, the parents attached a piece of wool in front of the door indicating her future as a homemaker. The female children spent their early years with their mother until about age 7. The female children were educated by their mothers, unlike the male children who went to school. The female children were taught household skills like weaving and childcare that they would need when they were adults. Once a girl turned 15, her father chose a husband for her, and they would live together. Was fairness and equality a part of Athenian society? For some people, Athenian society had fairness and equality, but to others, there was no fairness or equality. The male citizens had fair society to them, but other people in different class structures did not have fairness or equality like the male citizens did. The male citizens had fairness and equality amongst themselves. The male citizens were allowed to vote and take part in the assembly. Women, medics, and slaves did not have fairness and equality like the male citizens. The women, medics, and slaves were not allowed to take part in the assembly, and they could not vote. The medics had even less fairness and equality because they were not allowed to own property and they could not become a citizen of Athens. Athens was not fair because they believed that people that belonged to the same class structure should have equal rights, which was not very fair because if they want Athens to have fairness and equality, they should give everyone that is part of Athens the same rights. Athens did not have fairness or